Hello dear psychology students. In this mini lecture we're going to be taking a look at the trait or trait and factor approach to psychology and the measurement of personality using psychological testing. The approach we're going to take a look at now is called the trait approach, and an ordinary English synonym for the word trait is quality. The gentleman who gets the nod for inventing this particular approach to psychology, his name was Raymond Cattell, and he also gets the credit for inventing something called objective personality testing that we're going to talk about a little bit later in this lesson. But here's some examples of traits. Authoritarianism. Some people are bossier than others. Need for achievement. Some people are more ambitious. Self-consciousness. Some people feel awkward when they meet new people. Self-esteem. Some people have high self-esteem, some people average, some people sadly low. Some people are sensation-seeking. I have a cousin who thinks a wonderful thing to do is to jump out of a perfectly good airplane while wearing a parachute. Not me. I have no need to do that. And some people are more introverted, some folks are more extroverted. Those are some factors that you're probably already familiar with, traits, qualities. But at this point in time, the research suggests that 5 factors, these alone will explain most of human personality. Let's take a look at those now. And as we dig into these 5 factors, there's going to be some interesting things to note. First off, that these 5 factors tend to be relatively stable over a lifetime. In other words, if you are high on one of them, say for example conscientiousness, probably all your life you'll be a pretty doggone conscientious person. These factors seem to hold up very well across cultures, from one country, one ethnic group, one continent to another. In fact, it's the most powerful modern model that's out there now. And 2 guys by the name of Costa and McRae get the credit for inventing the most widely used test at this point in time. Now, as we start talking about these factors, I'd like you to remember either your choice of the words ocean or canoe, because either of these words, the letters in them, will help you remember what those 5 factors are. And you may see them again at some time in the future, like on a test. So let's take a look at them now and see what they are. Selecting the word ocean as our acronym, going to the letter O, we see that the first factor is openness to experience. These folks like to do new things. They're curious and adventurous in many ways, both exploring the environment and things of the mind as well. C, conscientiousness, not consciousness. Conscientiousness means follow-up in terms of responsibilities. They follow through on responsibilities they undertake. Extroversion. Some people are more outgoing than others, some people less so. A, agreeableness. Some folks have pretty good skills in terms of being able to get along with others, some folks not so much. And lastness. N, neuroticism, a tendency toward being anxious or depressed, being a bit on the nervous side as a person. Some people are more neurotic in style, if you will, and other folks more stable. Now, where this is all leading us is into an interesting corner of history. Early psychology was not so scientific, as you may remember, but admired chemistry and physics very much. And so some early psychologists attempted to copy chemistry. Okay, so here we go. Top of this particular page, you read that water is H2O and table salt is NaCl, which is to say 2 parts hydrogen and 1 part oxygen. Table salt is 1 part sodium, 1 part chlorine, and all matter, says chemistry, is made up of 118 elements. Well, just a few moments ago, we said that perhaps most of human personality could be explained by 5 factors, 5 traits of 5 elements. And what if there were psychological tests that would then measure these qualities in people? Well, then perhaps just as water is H2O, Well, we give Albert a test and we come back and we see that he's an O2, C5, E6, A3, and 7, having measured him on those 5 qualities. And he's not the same as Bill. Bill is an O7, C2, E2, A8, N2. And some psychological tests are built exactly this way. And so now we turn our attention to personality tests and psychological testing. There are 2 types of psychological tests, and one of those types of tests is called an objective test, and these tests or questionnaires are oftentimes called a personality inventory because they measure how much of some particular trait or quality or factor is present in you. And they're typically true, false, or multiple choice type questions on these tests. Well, here's an example of one. And the test I'm thinking of right now is called the NEO-PI. By the way, PI is short for personality inventory. We just talked about that. Neo is a prefix in an English word, means new, and what it did was come along and replace some earlier tests that were also pretty good, but this new one was somewhat better. Well, here's a sort of question that you might get on the NEO-PI. If I have a school project due next week, I prefer to work A, with others, B, alone. And a question like this could easily be intended to measure something such as extroversion, one of the big 5 qualities. The NEO-PI is a widely used test nowadays for measuring personality qualities in normal people. But there are some other situations where psychologists are also asked to evaluate somebody's personality. This might be upon admission to a mental hospital. You're trying to figure out what the diagnosis is. Or perhaps someone is in jail and you suspect that they're mentally ill, or perhaps even that they're faking mental illness. The NEO-PI is not going to take a look at their personality. It focuses on those original big 5 factors. For these folks, another objective test is going to be used, probably the MMPI-2, which is short for the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory 2nd edition. What changes now are the questions themselves. Here's some possible sample questions. I often wish I were dead. True or false? Or, voices in my head tell me to do terrible things. True, false? You can see we're getting down to a different level. We're trying to answer other questions now. Both the NEO-PI and the MMPI-2 are objective tests. These are sometimes called standardized tests. And in this type of test, the answers of the person who is taking the test in front of you that day, their answers are being compared to a large group of people in a control group or a comparison group. And for example, if what you're investigating or the question you're trying to answer is this person in front of you mentally ill? Well, if their pattern of answers very closely resembles the answers of some group of people whom you already knew were mentally ill when they took the test, that gives you very good reason to suspect that this person is also mentally ill. But there's also another type of psychological test. This type of test is called the projective test, and the most famous 2 that are out there is the Rorschach test, also sometimes known as the inkblot test, and also the thematic apperception test, and gives you a reasonable hypothesis about what their diagnosis is. The thematic apperception test involves showing the client a series of cards, ink blots, and asking them what they see when they look at them. And depending upon the answers that they give, the psychologist may get some idea or come up with some good hypotheses to investigate about what's going on inside of this person's head. So then if the client looked at these cards and a large number of others, and if they fairly frequently had themes of violence in them, he might suspect that there was some considerable anger inside of this person. They give you something to look at and investigate further. The second quite famous projective test is the thematic apperception test. It involves showing ambiguous pictures, that means you can't really be sure what they mean, to the client, and then asking them to make up a story about the picture. The idea being that in doing so, the client ends up revealing what's on their own mind, or at least their feelings. Consider the picture in front of you. One person might look at this youngster and say, he's thinking hard trying to solve the math problem that's in front of him. Another person might say, he's thinking about the terrible fight that his parents had that night, and this is getting in the way of his doing well in school. Another fellow is thinking, boy, I can't wait till I get out 'cause summer vacation is coming. Another person is thinking, gosh, my application to Harvard is in. When are they going to write back? So, depending on the story that the person tells, you can get some idea about what's going on inside their head. This is the time when I stop and say to you that no competent psychologist would rely on one or even two tests alone in forming an opinion about somebody's personality. Instead, there'd be a large number of things that were done. You'd interview the person, you might interview their family members and other people who knew them well. You get their school records, you do intelligence testing, you do testing for normal personality such as NEOPI. If you suspected something else was going on, you might throw in an MMPI, and on top of that you might throw in one or two projective items as well. And this entire battery of tests, a battery of procedures, is what a psychologist would use. By way of review then, in this particular video we've taken a look at the trait and factor approach to psychology. It has to do with identifying and measuring those bits of personality which are present in a person, those bits being called typically traits, sometimes factors. We said that the big 5 factors are, if we think about the word ocean, openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. We said that personality could be measured using psychological tests. The two types of psychological tests are the objective tests and then the projective tests. Within objective tests, we talked about the NEOPI for measuring normal personality, typically with the big 5, and then we also talked about the MMPI-2, oftentimes used in a situation where you suspect that some abnormality may be present. Following that, and finally, we talked about projective testing. There's the famous Rorschach or ink blot test, and also the thematic apperception test, where people are shown drawings and then asked to make up a story about it. Now, these two types of tests, the objective tests, are by far the more powerful, more reliable, and more valid. But if a psychologist were doing a full-scale evaluation of somebody, they'd almost certainly use both, plus a measure of intelligence, plus get all sorts of records and perhaps talk to family members and friends as well. So here's hoping that you found this mini lecture interesting, valuable, and educational. Take care now and have yourself a great psychology day. Bye.